All right. All right, it looks like you got good critical mass here, ladies. So I will keep an eye on the chat to see if anyone's having any technical difficulties. I'll take myself off camera and just let me know when you need me to start doing breakouts for you.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you, Meg.
That.
So hello, everybody. Just a note about how we're going to do today's session. Please place all your questions in the chat section of the Whova app or Whova platform. That way you can see each other's questions. If you use the Q&A function, only they're only a one-way thing, so you can't see each other's questions. So if you use the chat, it becomes more of a dialogue. And that's all I'll be looking at and monitoring. So just a little background on how today's session is going to work. I'm going to do a little introduction. We're going to spend, yes, Kathy, you've got the correct place for the so a portion of the session is going to be sort of a Q&A interview format with myself interviewing Katherine. Then we're going to spend a good chunk of time in breakout rooms. I think that it'll be a little bit more productive for people to be able to talk and share in that format. We'll come back, we'll share reflections, we'll have some time for Q&A and then closing remarks. So before we go any further, I should probably introduce the presenters today. My name is Kristin Gallas. I'm the project manager for education development at the Songus Industrial History Center in Lowell, Massachusetts. I'm the co-editor of Interpreting Slavery at Museums and Historic Sites and author of the forthcoming book, Interpreting Slavery with Children and Teens, focusing on school programming and youth programming at historic sites on slavery. I lead trainings for and develop interpretive plans with museums and historic sites on the topic of slavery and race in the United States. And I'm coming to you today from Medford, Massachusetts, homeland of the Massachusetts people. And my co-presenter is Katherine Kane. She's the former executive director of the Harriet Beecher Stowe Center, where she was for 20 years, and transformed a traditional house museum into a very public-facing program center talking about difficult issues. She is also the former chair of ASLH Council. And Katherine is joining us today from Denver, Colorado, traditional homeland of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, Ute, and Oshesi-Sakowin people.
Good morning, everybody.
So first and foremost, Katherine and I wanted to set an example by modeling for you that we acknowledge the privilege that we bring to today's discussion, which is based on our identity and how we operate in the world. We believe it is our responsibility as white people to start the dialogue and to keep it going. It's important to us to acknowledge that we can't place the burden on our African-American colleagues or community members, and that white privilege and racism are white problems, and we all need to be part of the solution. So today we wanted to talk about allyship and what that means. It's very much in the dialogue right now, and very much also in the community dialogue as well as in the museum world dialogue. So what does it mean to be an ally? An ally in this work in race and social justice can manifest in many ways. If you were fortunate enough to attend the ASLH conference and Christy Coleman's keynote presentation, she defined allyship as standing back, learning to listen, to learn, and make room for others at the table. If your table is too crowded, build a bigger table, right? To me, it's not about losing white seats or losing seats at the table. It's about adding diverse seats, diverse voices, so we can hear more and learn more. An ally is someone who stands aside, but standing aside is not passive. It's someone who's actively learning and pulling other white folks along with them in this work. Being an ally is consistent work. It's listening and building trust, which is a long process. 400 years of negative race relations in this country have sown mistrust. and we need to work diligently at building that trust individually and collectively. Katherine and I are very clear that we don't have all the answers in this session. Just like the larger process of building trust and allyship in our communities, it's about sharing knowledge with each other. It's about listening, and it's about learning. We have knowledge and experience to contribute to this conversation, just like you all. Every day, I feel my knowledge base growing, and I learn to be a better listener as I go. So we hope that that's something that that helps you on your journey. So one place to start in this, obviously there's the personal journey, and then there's the professional journey or institutional journey as you go along. And they're intertwining paths, right? Because our personal identity and place in the world influence how we operate at work and in our communities. Institution-wise, there has to be a grounding, right? Most institutions have missions, they have visions. But I think it's important for institutions to also have value statements. You know, what are your institutional values about equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion? How are you talking about that? How are you acting in your work with each other, with your community? And how are you grounding yourself in that? How are you developing an empathetic and respectful workplace in those relationships with your community and with each other? Your value statements can be something as simple as one organization I worked with, they wanted to, their values were respectful and reflective, and they were able to show how those two words operated in all of that they did. You might have something more complex. This, I believe, I took from the MFA's website: collect purposefully, collaborate generously, invite boldly, welcome warmly, and engage deeply. Right. So those are those values that they hold true, that are steering all of their work. Additionally, or alternatively, some institutions have statements of equity and inclusion that inform how they work, how their policy operates, and how they connect with their community. So thinking about, and that's not exactly what this session is about today. It's not about writing institutional statements, but it is one way for your organization to be very clear about what it means to be an ally as a colleague, and what it means to be an ally in your community, and really what reflects those core values. So I'm going to move, after those opening remarks, I want to move ahead with the next portion of our program, which is a Q&A with Katherine. As I mentioned, Katherine was the director of the Harriet Beecher Stowe Center, and we're going to use her experience as director there as a case study for how to approach this work of talking about race, racism, and privilege with staff and board members. And through a series of questions and answers, she'll share how the staff and board and the community in Hartford steps up and committed to making their work in public spaces welcoming and equitable for all. So, Katherine, so for me, and this question I get a lot of time is like, where do I start? Like, my board is like, they're stuck. My staff isn't, they're scared of talking about this. So how did you start engaging your board and your staff in these discussions of what it means to be an ally and how we can work together in this?
Terrific question. So as we start with this conversation, Kristin, just a couple of points sort of header points I'd like to make before I answer your question. Though we're talking about the Stowe Center today, my experience there, I don't want to think about this as a case study. It's kind of a personal reflection. I'm 2 years into retirement, holy moly. And so I've got some historical perspective. And of course, self-reflection is a key piece of what we do as we're doing life and anti-racist work. And there are several other key things that I want to sort of weave through my comments today. And I'll put these into our chat in a few minutes. So self-reflection, listening, Kristin's already mentioned that 27 times, listening, building trust, perseverance and patience because this work takes a long time and it may never be done. So we just have to go at it. We have to have courage. It's not easy, and we have to be brave. And from my point of view, when I feel uncomfortable, I know it's a good time to make things happen. We have to live with the discomfort. And we have to admit that we'll make mistakes. Oh dear, we'll make mistakes. It's what we do about the mistakes that's the important stuff. So I also want to recognize that as executive director of the Stowe Center, I had positional power and privilege. And so I learned over time, I think, to balance that. But also, I have been a staff person. All my other jobs were staff jobs. So part of my learning was watching other leaders who were on the scene. So the Harriet Beecher Stowe Center, Hartford, Connecticut. Hartford's the capital city in Connecticut, one of the poorest cities in the country and one of the richest states in the country. It's the hole in the donut. It's 130,000 people surrounded by about 1 million metro area. So it gives you a sort of sense of the place. And like many poor cities, officially and unofficially, the poverty has been concentrated in Hartford. Harriet Beecher Stowe, of course, 19th century author, famous American woman in her day, wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin along with 30 other books. And so at the Stowe Center, her final home in Hartford, a historic site, we used her story and impact to talk about, well, not talk about, but inspire social justice and positive change. And that mission drove everything that we did, and quite a bit of what I'm going to talk about. And then programmatically, 3 key programs: house tours, of course, it's a historic house museum. It's also a library and program center. And what we really built were public programs and the framework around that. And we, of course, also did school tours. So how did we engage the board and staff? Back to Kristin's question. We recruited staff and board by the mission. That was the first thing. Did they have an alignment with the mission? And it was absolutely critical to any success that we have. People found meaning in the mission, and they brought their personal experiences and then their thoughtful perspectives, and that helped create a framework in which we all worked. We also engaged the board and staff with a lot of personal contact. So I didn't sit in my office. I went to board members' houses and offices. I met with them. The whole idea was to have one-on-one conversations and build bonds, and that builds trust. So the board worked quite collegially, but they called out issues and worked on them. They built social relationships, which helps make that possible. And of course, board diversity was a priority from the beginning. When I joined the Stowe Center, and geez, it makes me feel funny to even say that, in 1998, when I joined the Stowe Center, the staff was entirely white, and there was one board member of color, an African-American man who was a community college president who quickly became board chair and was the first of several Black board chairs, and that also helped drive our change. With the staff, I tried to share my executive director power, involving people in decisions. I tried to think out loud so they could see when I struggled. I asked others to own projects and make the decisions. I worked hard to flatten the hierarchy and not control everything. And we built a culture with fun and challenges and tried to think of conflict, tried to have conflict that was constructive as opposed to destructive. So that's the summary of the way we did that, Kristin.
So I just want to go back to some of the points that you made. You talked about sort of qualities that you see in allyship being self-reflection, listening, building trust, perseverance, patience, and courage. And so some of the next questions address those qualities. In particular, you talked about building trust with your board and staff to engage them. Part of being an ally is building that trust with the African American community in Hartford. So how did that look? How did that sort of connection and building allyship work with the community?
That took, of course, years, but I think there were two key things. One was Stowe Center staff being involved in grassroots organizations in the Hartford community, from committees with the high school that was right next door to where we were, to much more visible groups, leadership organizations, etc. And in that way, we built networks and we built trust. It wasn't just me out there, it was my colleagues as well. And that helped build, people got to know us, and you cannot underestimate the importance of that. And of course, board and community people were helping us do that, building those bridges for us, taking me to African American sorority annual lunches and things like that, where I had one of those rare, not so rare for me anymore, white experiences where I was the only white person in a room of 400 or 500 people. And you begin to understand what it's like for every person of color who has to walk into a room. And so community involvement, that was a key piece of what we did. And then program development, where we built programs that were of interest to the community, the surrounding neighborhood, as well as the broader Hartford and greater Hartford community. And we did that by trying out stuff. We weren't sure what would work. People came because of house tours, but we wanted to, that's tourists. That's people generally from somewhere else, or local people bringing their out-of-town visitors. We wanted to involve the local folks. So we tried out a bunch of stuff. We took advantage of various opportunities, including Stowe's 200th birthday or Civil War anniversaries, etc. And we figured out what people wanted. They wanted to be part of the conversation. They didn't want to be passively lectured at. Just part, we're going to try and involve you in the conversation as well today. So they didn't want to be passive. So we built issue-based, conversation-based, issue-focused and conversation-based programs. We called the first batch of them, the first program series, we called them salons. And some of you maybe read about salons or heard me talk about them before. We started in 2008, where museums were generally not doing conversation-based programs. And we figured out how it worked for us. And over time, this conversation-based format, whether it's a book talk or a house tour, permeated everything we did. And what it meant was that people had a voice in the meeting, in the program, at the event. And we listened to folks, they participated, they told us what they wanted. And through all of these activities in this work, trust was built. And ultimately, we had the most diverse program audiences in the area. So we're very proud of that.
So in thinking about diversifying your board, which you talked about, I think that scares a lot of organizations, because the sort of mainstream traditional thought might be keep your big donors happy, don't do anything to sort of upset the apple cart. We don't want to lose that big money or those important connected board members by going into this sort of anti-racist, having these discussions. So can you address, to use another one of the words you used to describe allyship, courage, the courage that it took to step forward and work to diversify your board, and how that turned out for the Stowe Center?
Well, worrying about whether or not you're going to lose board members or money by doing anti-racism work and talking about the historical framework for our current circumstances. It's the most common question I get am I gonna, if I do what you're doing, am I gonna lose money? And that's a reasonable fear, isn't it? Especially as we're in the middle of a pandemic and all trying to figure out, all our museums are trying to figure out how to survive. It's a reasonable fear. But for me, the short answer is, yes, you will have losses, but you will have gains. And I expect that the gains will be bigger than the losses, whether that's board involvement in building board diversity, because at the Stowe Center, when I was hired, the board already had a priority to diversify themselves. They had only one member of color. And then by the time I left, I think it was probably 40%. It changed the whole, and the same with the staff, it changed the whole way that the organization works. And what we found was, because of our interpretive footing and our profile, and our visibility and our success and our work, we drew more funders that were interested in our mission than we lost. We drew more board members because, of course, we're recruiting board and staff through the mission. We drew them to us with their resources, whether they were political or financial or community-based resources, whatever. And that is a fear that you have to live with, but you have to take the risk. You have to have the courage to take your organization's framework and leverage it positively and constructively through your mission to build your resources.
So in going to another one of your characteristics, sort of perseverance, right? In work, training your staff, supporting your staff. So can you talk about what were some of the tools and resources that you kept providing for your staff? How did that sort of building that culture of allyship and the anti-racist work and towards this new interpretive direction? Can you talk a little bit about sort of how you fostered that within the community of your organization?
Well, from the beginning, well, I've always been interested in leadership and various kinds of leadership styles. And so and I had opportunities to test that, but as a staff person or as a leader in a nonprofit org like our Regional Museum Association in Colorado, Wyoming, and the Mountain West. And so this was an opportunity to find out whether I had what it takes. And I wanted to build a staff team that was cohesive, that was successful, that got stuff done, where we took risks and had courage, etc. And I think connecting that mission and that kind of approach attracted people. That doesn't mean it was easy. We had one accreditation visit where the visitors told us we had more ambition than capacity. And they thought that was an issue. And of course it is. But when they told us, the staff team and I, we all started laughing because that's right on the mark. If you're not walking that line between ambition and capacity, you never have enough money, you never have enough time. You still have to push it, or you're being passive and you won't really get anywhere. So that was kind of the philosophy. But kind of one-on-one, I worked with folks. We tried to mutually mentor one another. I wanted to be a leader, a director where staff could push. I didn't want to be too hierarchical. We did a lot of this through meetings. We had regular structures of meetings, whether projects or what, and we did a lot there. And I think the meeting culture was important. We rotated leadership of meetings and groups. And I worked really hard about dealing with negative thinking within the organization, because I think it's poisonous and it's contagious. So if there's a group or an individual who is perpetually unhappy or complaining or fussing, and you can't get them off that track, it it's contagious and it changes the whole culture of the group and is very hard to combat. So you have to take that stuff head on and fix poisonous negative thinking and promote positivity. Now, I'm not being naive, but that's a summary.
So we have a question in the chat that gets to your point about mission, about recruiting up to mission for board and staff and sticking to mission. And the question is, did you actively change the mission when you arrived, or was the mission already on this path when you got to Hartford?
The mission wording changed. It got, and what I quoted as the mission is summary, because it's got all the standard museum stuff about collect, preserve, and interpretive and all that stuff too, because it's all based on the collections in the site and the history. Kristin, I just lost track of your question. What's the question? Oh, did the mission change?
Right.
Sorry about that. I got on the wrong track there for a minute. Did the mission change? I did some research once back into the Stowe Center's archives looking at board minutes and figured out that the framework of that mission, social change approach, was initiated in the 1980s. Now they changed the language a bunch of times. They didn't get it so we could live with it until a strategic planning with the famous Laura Roberts, my first strategic planning with the Stowe Center in the late 90s, early aughts, where we got the language that we pretty much lived with for the rest of my tenure and that they still have. So really good question. Missions. Sorry, Kristin, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, do you think getting the language right in the mission really helped focus the intention of the direction, right? Because you can have sort of the intention in the mission, like you said, it existed out here. But if you get it right and have that, the right leadership to like move it forward.
And leadership's not just one person. Yes.
Collective leadership.
Yes.
So my last question for you is, you mentioned the first quality of allyship that you mentioned was self-reflection. So I'm gonna ask you to wax poetically on what have you learned about yourself? You know, I mean, yes, as a museum professional, as a leader, but in your journey of becoming an ally, of doing anti-racist work, what have you learned about yourself?
I've learned a lot. And first of all, I'm thankful to the people who've helped me on the journey, because as we all know, people of color are very generous with their time and their experiences and sharing those experiences with us so we can learn. And part of the point of allyship is to help support that and also bring ourselves along. So it's been interesting when Kristin asked me to do this session and I started thinking about Stowe Center time and the key people who helped with that. You know, it all goes all the way back, certainly to college years and high school years when I met people and knew people. And I realized also I've worked in diverse work environments, and in Denver when I lived here 20 years ago, I lived in an integrated neighborhood, etc. These weren't conscious things, but I think things I was looking for. At the Stowe Center, my learning was partly how to deal with folks in the community and deal with my fears when I had to, for example, be the white woman who was talking to the local African American history group about Stowe and getting, of course, challenging questions, learning how to answer those questions. One of my first responses when I am pushed or challenged has been in the past defensiveness, and I had to learn from the staff and also, obviously, importantly, from the community, how not to have that reaction so that I could listen, so that I could hear and I could learn. I feel more confident in situations like that. I had to learn how to think on my feet in a different way. It was petrifying a lot of the time. I made some big mistakes, totally put my foot in my mouth or did stupid stuff. But people are so generous that they will forgive you, not forgive you, but give you leeway. Yes, you can blow it, but oh well, how human are we all? And then the staff, when I worked with Stowe Center staff and learning to listen when people were brave enough to raise troubles they were having or issues, and then figuring out how to work together and talk with folks about that. I feel very honored that I had those experiences, and lucky, and I guess on a certain level proud, but it's still scary, and it feels like a lifetime job, and it is. I can see my pattern of learning, but I also know now much more how much further I and we have to go.
Thank you for that. We have one more question in the chat, and then we're going to move to the breakout room portion of the session. So during your time at the Stowe Center, was there a demographic change to the center in what, so maybe the physical exhibits, because you also, in addition to the house, historic house, you also had some physical exhibits. How did the demographics change when you shifted the interpretive messaging?
Changed completely. I can't say that the house tour audience changed that much. The house tour audience, of course, is, you all know what it is. It's women of a certain age and educational resource level trailing their families with them or their friends with them. And I think, that changed somewhat, but what really changed was the program audience growth. And the school tour program changed, demographics changed as well, as we targeted and built teacher relationships. I found generally that the going direct for the teachers as opposed to the districts or the schools, teacher relationships were the most important for us. But on the program demographics, we attracted, and then that also led to various event kinds of things we would do, like we annually give a prize for writing with impact on social justice. We call the Stowe Prize. And some of those people who've gotten it, like Ta-Nehisi Coates and Michelle Alexander and people like that, Matthew Desmond, have been on the bestseller list back again this summer, thanks to our summer experiences after George Floyd, etc. The demographics changed completely. And that meant that it wasn't just middle-aged and older white people, largely women. It was men and women. It was the Latino groups from Hartford, individuals from Hartford, African Americans from the region, younger people. We crossed gender lines in many ways. We had conversations and topics that attracted people, and then they knew that if they came to one of our salons or another program, they would be listened to and have an opportunity to speak. And if they didn't want to speak, they'd still hear interesting and challenging and provocative conversations with ideas for solutions.
Thank you. Paula, I see your question in the chat, and I'm going to hold that because I want to move to the breakout rooms, and we'll come back to it, I promise, before the end of our session. So I can't see you on my screen, but I've got it. So Meg, we have 50 some odd people in the room. What we'd like to do now is randomly assign you to breakout rooms. I know breakout rooms, and if we were in person, table discussions instill a lot of fear in people, and I respect that. I'm one of those people who are like, I have to talk. We chose this method because it's easier at least to talk to 5 people or 4 other people than 50 other people. So as we put you into breakout groups, we are going to give you discussion prompts, which I'll put in the chat. we hope that you think about those those qualities of allyship that Katherine put forward: self-reflection, listening, building trust, perseverance, patience, and courage, and seek first to understand each other, to be patient with yourselves and with others as you think through or talk through your thoughts, or your colleagues think through and talk through their thoughts. And then ask clarifying questions. This is a time to start building your skills and figuring out what it means to be in these discussions. So we're going to put 4 prompts into the chat. So when you get into your breakout rooms, we're going to be there for about 25 or so minutes. It's a long time. You can try all 4 prompts. You can pick a prompt. Katherine and I will be popping in and out of rooms, and we'll try to get to every room and join your chat. But our hope is that this gives you an opportunity to have a dialogue with each other, and maybe take some of the knowledge or aha moments back to your work group or into your personal life. So, Katherine, any other thoughts or things before we move to breakout rooms?
Well, I just think that the basic idea, you all have had experiences. We're giving you prompt, but share your experience, your worries, and your learnings, and so that we can all learn.
Excellent, thank you. So, Meg, 48 divided by 5, 9 groups maybe?
Yep, we're ready to go.
Excellent. Thank you. So go ahead and click join, and you'll join your breakout room. And I have to put the prompts in the chat. Oh, those came out as one long link.
Look at all those questions.
I know, that's too much.
No, I'm talking about in the Q&A.
Oh.
Of course, I haven't been able to look at them.
No, I got them. I asked you most of them.
Yeah, you're good.
All right, so we have some folks who haven't popped into breakout rooms yet. Oh, my nose is running. Just realized this is all being recorded. So you can edit that out, right? So I'm just going to go back up and make sure I get these questions.
Am I seeing that right? Make 200 people?
Meg, you're on mute.
Thanks. You have roughly 50 people who are currently participating.
Okay.
And then the folks that you've got listed as interested in attending are people who had you on their, they had you on their agenda.
Right.
So Kristin, what time do you want me to call everybody back? It's 11:26 now.
We said breakout groups would be 11:10 to 11:40, but that is obviously not what happened. So 11:45?
11:45. Okay, you bet.
You think so, Katherine?
So then we have a whole nother half an hour to go?
Yeah, maybe we should do longer.
A little bit longer?
11:50?
Yeah.
Because we wanted to do some reflection feedback, We have two more questions in the chat that came up at the very end of our Q&A part of the session, and then any other questions that come up. So 11:50, that'll give us time for more reflection and more Q&A.
Sounds good. Can do.
All right.
All right. So Katherine, I believe you've been given an invite to join the room, and
Yeah, I have it on my screen. I just haven't clicked on it yet.
okay, great.
So I'll pop in and then I'll pop back.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks.
Me too.
All right, and Callie and Hannah, if you have any difficulty, just let me know, and I am happy to help you out.
Hey Meg, I don't know if you can hear me. It's Allie from Discovery Museum. I just joined because I'm late and I'm not sure what's going on. Am I in the right place? Oh, you're on mute. I can't hear you.
My bad. All right, let me pop you into a breakout room. So they were doing an interview with Katherine Kane, and now they're doing a kind of discussion about like what are our own experiences with trying to be better allies, and looking at mission-based ways to help diversify programs and audiences and all that.
Do you know, is this one that's being recorded?
It is, but not the breakout room sections.
Okay, maybe I'll catch the recording rather than jump in on a conversation that a group's kind of already working on.
Okay, they just went into breakout sessions like 2 minutes ago.
Oh.
So you're welcome to join in if you would like. Otherwise, you're welcome to go hop in on something else if you would prefer.
Okay, thanks. I might get a few other things done, and I will definitely check out the recording.
Okay,
Thank you
sounds
so
good.
much.
They will be back from doing breakouts at 11:50. If you want to check back in, then they'll be back to doing sort of wrap up and answering a couple more questions that came up in the chat and things like that.
Oh, perfect. I might do that.
Okay.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
You bet. It's very nice talking to you, though all I see is Bessie.
Oh, yes. Well, Bessie misses you and says hello.
Excellent. Well, I miss you guys too. And I look forward to getting to bring Daniel to come play sometime soon.
Yeah, hopefully we'll see you soon. All right, talk soon. Thanks, Meg.
Bye. Hi there. Oop, nope. Hey, Marilyn, how you doing?
Oh, hi there. I just joined, so I didn't know if you can put me in a breakout room.
I am happy to put you in a breakout room, no problem. Hang on, and I will find one that looks like they need another person. Okay.
Are they by topic?
The questions are in the chat.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So, all right, I am sending you to room 3.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Marilyn. Hey, Kristin. All right, which room would you like?
Oh, I was going to say, how many folks have you had pop in to the main room?
We've had a couple of folks who said, oh, they're in breakouts, I'll come back in a little bit. And a couple of folks who were willing to be tossed into breakout rooms.
Okay.
Okay.
I guess you could send me to one that Katherine hasn't been in yet.
Okay.
I don't know how you would remember that, but.
No, I've been keeping a list, but she hasn't actually popped back. She's still in her first room, so.
Okay.
All righty, let's see. You were just in room 5, so yep. I'll send you to room 9. Okay. Okay, how did I do that? Move to, there we go. All right, have fun.
Thank you.
Hi there. So the group, oh, you're muted.
I'm assuming that everybody's in breakout rooms. Is there going to be a report out or what's the?
Yeah, they'll all be coming back at 11:50. So I can pop you into a room for the last 5 or 6
No,
minutes.
I think it's, they're working in small groups. I don't want to interrupt. So I'll just come back in 5 minutes and
Okay,
get a
sounds
report
good.
out. Thanks.
Okay, you bet. Hey, everybody. For everyone to get back. All the breakout rooms are going to boot them out in 14 seconds. So.
Hello. Everybody changed places on my screen now. So I was looking for Katherine. Now I found you. So I want to thank you all. I popped into 2 breakout rooms, got to hear on 2 discussions. And one of the points that was being made at the very end of the last group that that I was in is something that I always try to keep in mind, is that, and when I do trainings with sites, I say, this content isn't comfortable, right? Talking about race, talking about historically disenfranchised populations, or whatever that content is, you know, learning how to be anti-racist, learning how to be an ally, it is inherently uncomfortable, particularly for white people, but for many other people as well. And it's learning to hold that and learn from that. And I don't ever talk to people, or don't even ever tell people that they have to learn to be comfortable with this, because I feel that once we're comfortable with it, we become complacent in the work. In that, in talking with some colleagues, we came up with the terms being confident and competent in our abilities to talk about this. So being confident in the skills that you're developing to discuss these traditionally challenging topics, and to be competent in the scope of the historical knowledge, the psychology, the sociology around just talking about race and allyship and ethnicity. And so it's okay to be uncomfortable with that discomfort, and to own that. So I want to acknowledge that. I'm going to be quiet now, and I would like to, Katherine and I would like to open up for folks who would like to unmute themselves and share, or you feel free to put in the chat. What aha moments did you have during these breakout rooms? Was there something that you learned about yourself or about the concept of allyship or anti-racism where you went, huh, that's cool, I hadn't thought about that before? And I can't see folks if you raise your hand, so I can't see.
One.
Oh,
Can
go
you see
ahead.
me if I speak?
I can see you, Marjorie.
Okay, great.
Hello.
Hi, Kristin. I'm Marjorie. I work at the Fitchburg Art Museum, and I had a great discussion with my group. And one of my aha moments came from Tiffany, actually, where she made that distinction. Kristin, you were just talking about competency, and she made this really great distinction between understanding all of this and then being competent in it, and actually not just feeling like you get it, but you can't do anything about it, and actually taking that step to do the work, take action, make mistakes, have conversations, and then that transforms into competency. So I thought that was really enlightening and a good way to think about it.
Thanks. I see Ken just put in the chat, it's about relationship building and it takes time. Ken, would you care to elaborate on that? I know you've had some experience in this realm of building relationships with in your role with Historical England.
Sure, and going way back, just know we were talking about transactional we were talking about being transactional. We were talking about relationships, and the discussion was about that it really is about relationship building and nurturing that relationship. And that includes forming a trust. And from experiences that I've had in my career, sometimes, you know, the trust wasn't there at the beginning. It was a group actually that was alienated from the museum. And these kinds of relationship building, you have to be absolutely 100% sincere. They're not transactional. They're really about relationship building. And this takes time. And it also has to be nourished, and we talked about that. And it shouldn't be built on just an individual's relationship, and we gave an example from historic New England, where we've had a relationship with the History Project, Boston's LGBTQ Historical Society, essentially for over a decade. And it started with a relationship between one person on our staff, but now it's blossomed, and it's a relationship with many of our staff, so that if one of us leaves, the relationship does not end. The relationship will continue. And fortunately, in my group was Martha from Historic New England, who is also part of that larger group now that has this relationship. So it's great to see that, but these things do have to also be nourished. And Kristin, I could go on and talk forever, and I shouldn't. But the other thing I will say, that I'll stop, is that sometimes, and I'll say our organization has been guilty of this. There's been that, oh well, we should be working with this group and we should be working with this group, and I've come now in my experience, you can't. It's better to have deep-rooted and long-lasting connections with, maybe it's just a few groups of different kinds of people, than to try and to serve the world. And I'm going to stop talking.
Thank you for your insights, Ken. Other aha moments or thoughts that people would like to share?
Well, I guess from an exhibit development point of view, no matter what your topic is, no matter what the town is, you got to look for people of color and other cultures that have influenced the history or the subject matter. And it may not be easy to find. That's one of the things that came out. It's like, there's a person who's, Lisa, is in charge of the Historical Society in Farthest, Maine. And she has evidence of an African-American community that was there, but it's going to be hard for her to find out exactly who these people were. Because in the histories that we're always asked and being paid to develop, it's usually a big thing, it's the war, it's the entire history of a community. But it's our job now to make sure that there's a diverse group being represented in the story. And I feel like we're at that tipping point where everybody's there. You don't have to be prompted to ask that anymore, but you're going to look for it. And your client may not ask for it, but you will present it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. See a thumbs up from Katherine. Any challenges or successes of allyship that examples that folks shared in their breakout rooms that we could learn from? I see, Archie, I saw a hand. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, one of the things that I talked about in our breakout group was this work doesn't stop once we leave our institution. It's a way of life. It's the way that we live our lives. It's the way we share our holidays and all of this, because I think if we just focus on the museum aspect, that's where we close the doors and it doesn't go out into society. And I think this is a societal issue. And I think it's upon all of us to change that. And so that's one of the things I would like for people to keep in mind. It doesn't end when you shut the door of your institution. It's how you live your life when you're washing your car, shopping for food, picking up your kids, waving to a neighbor, all of that. So that's how we need to focus on this issue. Thank you.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree. And I think vice versa, right? How you live your life affects then what happens in the institution where you work. So it's, yeah, absolutely. Oh, Lynn, go ahead. I see you popped up with the blue hand. Yay.
Yeah. And I just wanted to acknowledge what Archie just said, and then also say, because we've been in this position in our museums, that when you leave the museum, you shouldn't be the only one. And somebody was it Ken was just saying that too, that it should be embedded enough into the museum so it's not all on that one person and then the whole thing dies or collapses. And that the relationships that are built outside the museum into the community from the museum should be sustainable. So it is not incumbent on one person to keep all of that going. And to Archie's point, if we do our jobs right, it should be all over the community, because museums can have that kind of impact much more broadly than we ever thought about years ago. That today the role of the museum has become much more community focused and embedded.
It's a really good point, Lynn. As you were speaking, I thought about the mass action tool. So if any of you have not made yourselves aware of the mass action tool, it's museumaction.org is the website. It's a toolkit and resources for sort of assessing where you are as an institution. And I think you could probably do this on your personal life too, is where you are for engaging in equity work. And, you know, you can look at the rubric and say, oh, here's where we're lacking in, or where I'm personally lacking, and what can we do or I do to build my skills in that area. So I think that's a really good tool to start with. Is it Janie? I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I direct the Fleming Museum at the University of Vermont. And I've been also thinking a lot about sustainability with this, because we are doing, have been doing this work now only for 8 months, but pretty intensely. And especially at a university museum with a parent organization, how to build it in such a way that it doesn't go away when the director leaves or other key staff members leave. And I think one of the other ways that we need to keep things that we need to keep in mind is, if we do the work in a profound enough way, it will also attract other people who are interested in carrying that on, you know, and they will see your institution X as a place to do that work. That's it.
Exactly, and Katherine, you talked to that in your Q&A session. So I actually want to turn back to you with a couple of the questions that were in the chat that we didn't get to. So Katherine, back to you in the hot spot. There was a question of, can you give an example of a mistake you made in your allyship journey and how you learned from it?
What mistakes? First of all, thanks everybody for sharing and talking to one another, and very thoughtful comments and moving responses here. Mistake. Well, I guess, you know, I could talk about where I was walking to dinner with an old friend, a well-known man of color, and I'd had one glass of wine, and in my family tradition, I made some kind of sarcastic remark that I instantly realized was a racist remark. And I just wanted to crawl down the gutter and hide. You know, I just apologized. It was awful. It was bad enough I don't remember what I said, you know, instantly blocked it out. But anyway, the filter, you know, was slightly off, and it reminded me how programmed we are since birth in white supremacy. And so, but I think there's stuff like that, but there's also I think maybe some of the biggest mistakes I made were in hiring, and I mean staff in general, and the impact of those hirings on other individuals in the staff. And I found that what I thought was a strength, in that I see potential in people and I hire for that, I'm not sure anymore is a strength. Because just because I see the potential doesn't mean that it will come out. And so I made some mistaken hires over the 20 years, and some of them were people of color and most of them were white. And these were direct reports to me, people I was individually hiring, not other other sections of the museum. And when a leader does that, everybody suffers. When the capacity isn't there, the performance isn't there, or the attitude isn't there. You can teach the knowledge actually, but you can't teach everything. You can't make people do things. So that was, this is kind of downer to talk about, but that was something I found frustrating. I think I got better at it, but it messes up the whole institution when somebody's not carrying their weight or confrontational in a destructive way or whatever, and then you have to deal with it one way or another. Hopefully the individual is also miserable and gets their next job, and that was usually what happened. So
there was another question specifically about the content at the Stowe Center. Did you address the Uncle Tom stereotype that evolved from the book? And if so, how? And how did that, I'll add to it, sort of how did you turn that into a learning experience, I would imagine?
Absolutely, we addressed it. We had to. You have to take the difficult stuff head on and straight on. And when I was first there, an old friend, Barbara Charles, said to me, Stowe's known because of Uncle Tom's Cabin. Why is the Stowe Center talking about all these other Beechers, her extended family, all this other stuff? And she was right. So, and that meant also not ignoring the Uncle Tom stereotype, because even, Uncle Tom's Cabin's a 19th century book. When you read it, you can see Stowe's racism. We had to not ignore that. And what we tried to do was educate with exhibits about how Uncle Tom became Uncle Tom. We responded also, I had a Google alert on it. We responded also to various things around the country that came up. But we also didn't deny, we didn't ignore it. We tried to address it head on. We had a whole year of programming around the 150th anniversary of Uncle Tom's Cabin, and a lot of it was about how what Uncle Tom, the stereotype, means, what it meant then, what it means today, how it developed, and what jumping off points do we have, each of us as individuals or the museum have from there. Hope that answered that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that it aligns with other things that I've heard and that we've talked about is, to paraphrase Baldwin, things, the things that things that can't change unless we face them. I'll basically say that. Baldwin wrote more eloquently, but you know what I mean. Things won't change unless you face them, but not all things can change unless they're faced. So we're heading up to the end of our time together. So just a few points in summary. The really 6 amazing characteristics that Katherine put forth about being an ally: self-reflection, listening, building trust, perseverance, patience, and courage. And to paraphrase our colleague Christy Coleman, stepping aside but not being passive, being active learners in the process, and build a bigger table so that more people can join you at it, and your feast is more rewarding and bountiful. So that's all I want to say. I want to toss it to Katherine to see if you have any final words for our community today.
Well, I think it's been meaningful. Thank you for the challenging questions. Thanks for the opportunity to talk. But most of all, it was a pleasure to hear what you all had to say. And thank you for being part of this. I'd just like to sort of say something that we haven't quite as directly touched on that relates to all of this. And it's talking about the fear of giving up our white privilege. We have to admit, those of us that are white, we have to admit the fear, and that's one of the biggest barriers. As white people, giving up our privilege, we're going to lose things, or we may lose things, depending on how we think about it, right? Power, influence, money, a chance. We'll lose our privilege. As Kristin said, one of the solutions and answers to that is make the table bigger, because it doesn't all have to be white people at the table. Let's get out of the way. But I also think we have to admit that, and as we talk with people, we have to admit that. We have to recognize that underlying fear that's around so much of this split, I guess, in our country. But I think we have to focus on what we can gain, and we have to talk about that more. It's not that we're losing, it's what we're gaining, making the table bigger, more people there, more joy, more pain, more sharing, more bonding, more relationships. And if we're closer to the it will bring us closer to the American promise of justice and equality for all. We aspire to that, and we're not there. We may never be there, but we aspire to it. And if we aspire to that and get further along that track, more people will be safer, healthier, happier, well-fed, with roofs over their heads, and that's good for all of us. So thanks, Kristin, for asking me to do this, and hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you, Katherine, and thank you, everybody. We put together a list of resources that I attached to the NEMA list of resources somewhere in a web document. So Meg, I don't know if I think those will get posted with videos, is that correct?
Yeah, actually, all of the handouts that you posted should be available on the NEMA website under resources. There's a link on the Whova platform under the resources tab as well to go find the session handouts.
Thank you. So that's where you go. So if you have further questions, my contact information and Katherine's contact information are in the Whova app. So, feel free to ping us and keep doing the work. It's really important. So thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of the NEMA conference.